Good afternoon. Welcome to Sweethearts in Service. My name is Jamie Besance. I'm the Visitor Engagement Coordinator at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum. Before we start the program, I want to thank the members of Missouri Historical Society and of the Giving Circle of Soldiers Memorial, as well as the sponsor of this Chow and Chat series, Beelman Truck Company. Their support makes it possible for us to put programs like this on. Before we start the program, I also need to mention a few logistical details. So we'll have about a 30 or 40-minute presentation followed by time for Q&A. It's best to submit your questions in the Q&A box down below rather than the chat box. I'll find them more easily that way. Hopefully we can get to all of your questions, but if there's a lot of questions for whatever reason, we might not be able to answer them all. If you're interested in seeing this again, or if you want to share it with a friend, a few days after each online program, they're uploaded to the Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel. So you should be able to find it in the St. Louis History Live playlist on the Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel. Also, after the program ends, a short survey should automatically pop up in your browser. If you'd be willing to take a couple of minutes to fill that out, we'd really appreciate your feedback. So our presenters today are Michael Vinso, the Military and Firearms Curator, and Caitlin Scott, the Collections Manager at Soldiers Memorial Military Museum. I think Mike is going to be starting us off here.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And good afternoon as well. And we're delighted that you joined us today for our Wednesday Chow and Chat. This is Sweethearts in Service. And the title of this program that my colleague Caitlin and I put together came up with that title from the object classification terms, which are often known as sweetheart jewelry or sweetheart pillowcases for these items that have a military connection to their service. And what we didn't know when we settled on that as a title for this program is that within the Soldiers Memorial collection, we would actually have a greeting card, as you see here, with the title "To My Sweetheart in the Service." But sort of a better, a more suited artifact, I guess, really couldn't be found than this little piece. So beyond the greeting cards of a young soldier, as you see here, being licked by this cute pooch, as he imagines a kiss from his two-legged sweetheart, lies a group of artifacts that speak to a broader theme of tokens of affection that connect those in military service and those back home. The origin of these sweetheart items dates back to World War I, when they were mass produced, and they were done so to really bolster the war effort and to ease communication among the nearly 3 million men and women serving overseas. The popularity of pillowcases, handkerchiefs, jewelry, greeting cards surged again to new heights in production during World War II. But it really didn't continue in this sort of large scale in subsequent wars. The wartime rationing of metals, especially during World War II, was a critical factor. It limited the options for making the jewelry, but they found some creative solutions. Things like sterling silver and wood and plastic were materials that ultimately became pretty popular among the sweetheart jewelry, and they found their ways into the hands and hearts of mothers, wives, and girlfriends on the home front. Curator Kathleen Golden of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History wrote about the popularity of sweetheart jewelry, and she said that these items were really considered fashionable, patriotic, and reflected a sense of service. And I think today, as we click through some of these, you'll see those sort of three characteristics quite evident. Also considered part of the same family of military artifacts are sweetheart textiles that follow the same production trends and purpose of the jewelry. Pillowcases that could hold letters or cover a small throw pillow on the couch back home served as reminders of affection and offered something tangible to hug or kiss in the absence of a soldier or sailor. Likewise, greeting cards with military themes made correspondence from and to those in service easy, creative, and personal. Some of the early examples of cards and postcards include embroidered messages that predate the mass-produced color greetings that are a staple of our correspondence today. And so with that short background, and in honor of Valentine's Day, which is Sunday, our collections manager, Caitlin Scott, and I are going to highlight a few sweetheart items in our collection. So this first one that Kate has pulled up is a sweetheart pillow from World War I. And this is a really good example where you can see by its wear and its condition that it was used and treasured by its recipient. The cover has a little embroidered tag bearing the inscription, "Remember Me," which is this overarching theme among the sweetheart jewelry. It was a tangible way that these pieces could represent this person and the distance between two people. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see what it looks like when it would be opened. And here you see that the inside has a pair of lovely patriotic sentiments. The silk flag and the stripes is very obvious. They're heavily worn from their use. And it also speaks to the fabrics, the types of fabrics and the amount of fabric were limited during World War I and World War II. And so these were made, but kind of less durable materials, and certainly in quantities that the war rationing didn't allow. So these pillows like this, what's really interesting about them is that they would also carry a little pocket. So where the flag sits, it's sewn on three sides, the two sides and the bottom, and the top part of the flag allowed for a pocket to be created. And so it made the perfect place where the sender could put a personal note or a long letter, and then that would be tucked into the pillow. And then, of course, the recipient could lay on the couch or go to bed at night with their head on that pillow and knowing that those words and thoughts of their beloved were close at hand. So in the next slide, we have an example of a World War II pillowcase of sort of the same style. And so here the materials have shifted a little bit as technology has advanced. This is a kind of a satin or a rayon. And so this uses more sturdier fabrics. And you also see a bit of a transition here between the more prominent patriotic images to romantic imagery. And on the next slide, you'll see the interior, again, following that same pattern of the earlier pillows. And you see this poem to his sweetheart, where he was stationed in Florida, and the little poem. And these poems, I should say, were repeated over and over again. There's kind of a handful, maybe a little bit like we think of the fortune cookie messages that many of us might get. There's a limited number of these poems, and they would get repeated over and over again, depending on who the recipient was. But that last line of that poem is hoping that God may keep you safe for me. And this was mailed by Sergeant Carl Haverman to Irene Heidemann during his service in World War II, right before he was shipped off to the Pacific Theater. He served as a sergeant in the U.S. Army Air Forces from January 1943 until December of 1945. And apparently this pillow was very effective as Irene was kept safe and during Carl's absence. And then upon his return, the couple married and eventually had 5 children. Next is a pillowcase or sham that was sent by Corporal Robert A. Blaze to his mother, Adele, most likely in late 1944 or 45. And this is from Camp Walters, Texas. Camp Walters is a large U.S. Army infantry replacement training center in north central Texas, just a little bit west of Fort Worth. That happened to be the location where one of America's most decorated World War II combat soldiers, Audie Murphy, who earned the Medal of Honor, where he completed his training. This pillowcase, again, offers the poem and image with that familiar rose, this one to his mother. Go to the next slide. And here's an example of a post-World War II pillowcase. And you can see the familiar format and style, but with a message for his mother and dad. And here you see a switch back to military imagery where it's emphasizing the strength of the U.S. Navy with the motifs you see there. And in part, that's because this is to mom and dad. So some of that imagery changes a little bit, but they also fit kind of a pattern of their use, where the romantic imagery tends to really be heavy with the World War II items. And as these became less lower in production and sort of less popular after World War II, they shifted to a little bit more didactic kind of materials that are associated with posts or their branches of service. This particular pillowcase was sent by Bruce Yampolsky, and he was stationed at the U.S. Naval Training Center in San Diego, California in 1960, where he served in the Medical Corps. And he kept up a tradition of service within his family, just like his father and his uncle. And it was sent to his parents here in St. Louis. And we're lucky of this example, and I've seen some examples in other collections with earlier mailings, but we have the envelope. And I think if the next slide will come up, there we go. And so why the envelope is important, it gives us a little clue into how these little sweetheart pieces, in particular, the pillowcases or handkerchiefs or scarves, how they really functioned. And the envelope or the little box mailer that these were purchased in made that communication very easy for the soldier or sailor. So they would typically go into the PX, and you'd have options to purchase these items. And when you'd pick out, it was going to your girlfriend, your sister, your mom and your dad, you could very easily slide this into that envelope, a quick addressing of the envelope. You might drop a little note in there and leave that right there at the PX to get mailed. And so just in a matter of minutes, you can kind of keep up that correspondence, send a quick token back home with the hopes that they would indeed remember you. And then the next slide is the last one that I'm going to present on. And this is kind of a unique one. This is a scarf from the Korean War period. And it resembles the earlier styles of some of the pillowcases that we have, but with a more sort of handmade aesthetic. You can kind of see the stenciling of the message there. So we have very little information about this particular piece, including where it was made or who it was mailed to or where they were. But you can see that it has a really beautiful and detailed tiger and dragon motif that overlays a map of the Korean Peninsula. It also includes 4 flags. You'll see the United States, Great Britain, the United Nations, and South Korea. It has a date of 1952, which is in pretty much the middle of the Korean War, and it's addressed to my dear wife. The reference to main city in Korean War is kind of interesting language, and again speaks to this kind of handmade nature of it. And that may be a reference to Seoul, South Korea, or Pyongyang, North Korea, or even some other particular city that we just don't know where this was shipped from. So it could have been a scarf that was purchased with the central elements perhaps already printed on them, with that tiger and dragon motif and the map, and perhaps the flags even. And then the purchaser sort of added those embellishments and the message that you see there. And this is possibly done because there was that absence of these being mass produced in the style that we showed you earlier. But regardless of its origin, it's really a lovely example of the continuation of these sweetheart items that provided a point of connection during times of war. So with that, I'm going to let my colleague and our collections manager, Caitlin, take us on a little journey into some of the other items that we have.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the first category that I'm going to talk about is jewelry, which Mike already gave a little bit of an intro to, but one of the pieces that we do have in our collection is this sweetheart pin. And as you can see on the left-hand side, it has the word mitzvah, and on the right-hand side, it does have this phrase, "The Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent from one another." And while unfortunately we don't know who the individual was that owned this pin or who sent it. The history behind mitzvah jewelry is actually very interesting in and of itself. So mitzvah is Hebrew for watchtower, and actually this word is mentioned in the Bible story in the book of Genesis. It's the story of Jacob and Laban. And in this story, Jacob flees from his father-in-law's house with his wife and his children, or his wives and his children. But then the two men eventually do come to an agreement, and they build a pile of stones to mark this agreement. And in the story, they call this pile of stones a mitzvah because they considered it a watchtower with God as their witness. And then the phrase that you see here on the screen that's also engraved on the pin, it does come directly from that story. After the word mitzvah is mentioned, this phrase is a direct quote. So since then, mitzvah has come to connote an emotional bond between people who are separated. And so then in about the 1850s to 60s, mitzvah jewelry really came to the forefront and began being produced. It was kind of due to the social rules of the time, actually considered an appropriate gift or token to be exchanged between a man and a woman, especially because a lot of them did contain a verse from the Bible. And so it was exchanged between people who were lovers or close friends who might be separated for some amount of time. And this jewelry did remain popular up until the 1880s. And then it kind of fell away, wasn't as popular, but then it saw a huge revival leading up to World War I as men were getting ready to ship off to serve. And at that time, it kind of was potentially thought of as a piece of protection. It would return their loved one to them safely. But then by the end of World War I, this jewelry kind of fell away again, and it never really had kind of the same revival that it did. And then moving into cards and letters, another way sweethearts, family members, or loved ones kept in touch was through letters and cards. We have many, many examples of this throughout our collection, but we're just going to highlight a few here today. And the first ones that I have for you are these two black and white postcards that were sent by William Kruger to his wife at the time, his wife, Helen Kruger. William served in the US Army during World War I. So you can see the postcard on the left. It has the phrase in both French and English, which is kind of a cool detail. But it says, "Near you by my dreams, happy by your love," in both languages. And then the other one is this "A Kiss from France" postcard. And you can tell that these portray more romantic imagery, and they are meant to be sent to a wife or a sweetheart who's back home. The next story that I have is this wonderful collection of letters that was sent by Archibald or Archie Doyle to his sweetheart, Hilda. The photo in the top left is actually Archie himself, so you can kind of get a visual of who was sending these letters. Unfortunately, we don't have a photo in our collection of the two of them together. But the top photo in the center, it does show a zoomed in visual of the envelopes that he sent all his letters in. We are incredibly lucky that not only do we have all of the intact letters, but we have every single envelope that they were sent in. So this provides more detail of when it was mailed and where it was mailed from, which is great. And this is just one of many letters written to her. As you can see from the photo in the top right corner, this is just quite a stack. And that stack is probably only about an eighth of the letters that we have from them. So their communication was consistent and lasted through the entire course of his service. The two of them actually met here in St. Louis. So when the United States entered the war in 1941, Archie joined the United States Army Air Forces, and then he actually received part of his training at Scott Air Force Base. And during this time when he was serving there, that's when he met Hilda. She was a native St. Louisan. The two of them connected. They corresponded throughout the entire war. And then following the war, he moved back to St. Louis and they were married. What I love about these letters is he writes of anything and everything that he can think to tell her, even if it's just something as simple as the weather. And you can kind of tell that from this small excerpt that I've highlighted from one of his letters here, where he writes, "My darling Hilda, well, honey, I received a letter from you yesterday and also one today. Glad to hear you had a wonderful time on your vacations. The weather here has been terrible for the past week, nothing but rain day after day. It's quiet in the barracks now. Everyone is out to town except for the three of us." And the rest of the letter just kind of continues on like that, trying to just update her on anything he can, wanting her to know that he's doing well and that he will see her soon. All right. And then the last grouping that I have for you is a collection of cards, which may also be one of my favorites. So while the other cards and letters that I just kind of ran through were sent by men serving back home to their sweethearts, this collection of cards was sent by Grace Sheehan to her husband when he was serving in the US Army during World War II. And they also have quite a bit of humor to them, which is something else I love about them. And the ones that I'm going to show you are only a small selection. She sent cards to John from March 1943 all the way to May 1944. So again, the amount that we have in the collection is quite large, which is great. So this first card, you'll recognize the front because it was on our cover slide, but I wanted to make sure that you all got to see the inside of it as well. And it's, if you can't read it, it says, "I hope you always dream of me whenever you are napping, for if you do, you will be sure that this will never happen. Love and best wishes." And then also she has a habit of kind of writing her own little messages on the inside of the cards as well. And then as you can see from the back of the card, she would write a pretty long, lengthy personal note on the back of each one too. And here she writes, "This verse doesn't make sense to me." Another one of the cards that was sent by her is this one, which is fun and a little different. So it kind of has two optional front covers, the little tab at the bottom where you can move it a little bit and it will switch from either a brunette or to a blonde. So you can pick which one you want to send to your sweetheart serving overseas. And as you can tell from the discoloration on the card, it had been on the brunette for quite a while. And then here's the inside of that card. Another kind of witty and slightly humorous note. And she writes underneath there, "I'm that gal." And the other great thing about this collection of cards is that she dated every single one of them, as you can see down there at the bottom. So we know exactly the order that they were sent to him in and when they were sent. And this is another one that I pulled. I liked the bright, I thought the bright colors and the message was funny. But all the different pictures are just, it's a great visual. And then this last one is another great one. The front says, "To my guy in the service, when you find yourself with time to spare." And then on the inside, you open it up and it says, "Don't flirt with the local gals, just settle down to a nice quiet game." And then the whole entire card unfolds into a checkerboard. So that's all I have for you. But if there are any questions or anyone wants to go back to a slide to see something more closely, please let us know.
That was really cool, guys. Thank you. We actually don't have any audience questions yet. We have some new people in the audience who maybe didn't hear at the beginning, but if you have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A bubble down at the bottom of the Zoom window. That'll be where we can find them. Oh, this was just lovely. Not a question, but wonderful feedback. So I guess one question I have is about the stock poems that you mentioned, Mike. I don't assume that anyone was trying to kind of sell that as their own work or anything like that. Were people kind of aware of these same few poems that were circulating, or what was kind of the cultural understanding of what was happening there?
Well, one of the kind of mysteries about these pieces is the manufacturing of them and sort of who were the companies that were producing them. My sense of it is that there were a number of manufacturers, but within that, each of those kind of different styles and productions, they had sort of a stable of these standard poems that they would use. And there's lots of limitations. It had to be fairly short, easy to read, that could fit within that, and then also had to be really universal in its appeal. And so one of the little mirrors, I guess, that I really love about like Grace Sheehan's her work, her correspondence, was that she would annotate the pre-printed cards, right? Just like we get a greeting card today. And my dad does this a lot when he sends notes, and he'll add something. So she was taking something that had this universal thing about the girl that was left behind, and then personalizes it by, and I'm that gal. And so that, I think, is really wonderful. And I think that's kind of the purpose of those poems, is that they kind of had to work for everybody, different ages, different races or ethnicities, different religions. And so they were generic, and so they would get repeated a lot. But it's interesting when you look at all the different types of pieces, whether it's jewelry or pillowcases and things, they tend to be focused on men sending things back to women. So mothers, wives, sweethearts is how it's often referred to, sisters often in there. But there are some pieces too that go the other way too, where there'd be sort of corresponding lapel pins that you could wear. So there's some in some of the research works we've looked at that would say boyfriend or husband. So they might wear on the other side as that token. So I also really love the back and forth with the pieces.
We have an audience question. Is the collection predominantly letters that were sent to St. Louis from people overseas?
So I would say that while it's a mix, but I would say that probably the majority is letters that were sent here to St. Louis back home. There's still lots to go through, and so we may discover more and more that were sent to soldiers abroad, but what I've found so far is that the majority is stuff being sent.
I guess that makes sense. If it was sent abroad, it has to make it back somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll find that too when you look at a lot of correspondence, especially wartime correspondence, is that what tends to get saved and preserved are the things that came back home, where it was just they weren't in a war zone, and like if you can imagine a soldier and you had a very prolific correspondence going, where were you going to put all of these? You can imagine that stack of all those right. letters and the Archie Doyle collection. That where would you carry all that as you were going and traveling about from place to place? So more often than not, it's the letters home that tend to survive, as opposed to the letters sent to overseas. And that's true too of like the jewelry items, that kind of thing, and like the ones the textiles that we highlighted, those were designed. You'd buy them at the PX where you were, overseas, do that to just ship something home. as a quick, easy way that you could acknowledge, that relationship and that they didn't forget you, and a kind of even quicker way of sitting down and writing a letter. If you could just put a little, love you and mom, there's a beautiful poem. It's got a charming rose on it. What mom wouldn't want to receive that from her boy?
Another question I had was, I think everything we saw today was pretty old, and I know that the collection is we have more stuff the further back you go. Maybe service veterans who are still living or hanging on to some of these mementos and that kind of stuff. So I know we just have more older stuff. But communication has also changed a ton. So I'm curious, probably rather than exchanging letters, a lot of people are doing email or whatever. But has the tradition of kind of sending mementos and that kind of stuff, has that fallen out of favor at all? Or might be hard to say, I suppose.
Yeah, in terms of the collection, we do tend to have, a wealth of these items related to the two big conflicts, World War I and World War II. And that's largely the product of the volume of people that we're serving and corresponding. Certainly, there's a lot of correspondence that's happening, and as you pointed out, Jamie, that's evolved a little bit, and there still are people, actively serving today that are sending things back and forth. And even pre-World War I, there's certainly are letters. MHS published a collection of letters, Civil War sort of love letters. The soldier happened to his last name was Love. I think we did a previous challenge chat on this that our archivist Molly Codner put together from things that are in the collection. So the idea of that sort of sweetheart correspondence has been around forever, American Revolution and even in wars in Europe before that. But the sort of commercialization of it, or the ease of it, where it became that kind of mass produced, that really picks up, turn of the century and into World War I. And one thing I don't know that I mentioned is that this was also part of gathering support for the war, right? It's a little bit of a propaganda piece where if your loved ones were sent overseas and you never heard from them and they didn't send anything back to you, it's real easy to sour on your support of this conflict and what's really happening. But if there's a means and a way in which you can continue to have that communication, that makes it a little more tolerable, and you'll continue to perhaps support this effort. And you see that today in the modern military, in that there are structures and infrastructure put in place to allow these families to communicate across the globe. So just like today we're doing these Zoom calls, there are soldiers right now on a Zoom call talking to their family and loved ones back and forth. And less sending jewelry and those kind of things back and forth. It's much more practical now, like the care packages of socks and Slim Jims and chocolate chip cookies for home, which we don't have any in the collection. I don't know that we'd be able to sustain and care for some cookies. They wouldn't last very long in my department anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see.
Yeah, I like it. Also, I love this piece that Kate showed, the checkers. It does beg to, like, where's the checker pieces, like what the missing. And maybe I guess you could use pennies or something like that. Picking pennies and nickels might pop on there. I did want to add one thing. I don't remember, Kate, as you were talking about Grace Sheehan, did you also tell not only about her service, but then, so she after she sent all that correspondence to her husband, what happened to him and then her own service?
I did forget that. So they corresponded all throughout up until 1944. And then unfortunately, May 10th, 1944, she did receive a telegram indicating that he had been missing since April. And he was killed during Exercise Tiger, which was a training maneuver to simulate the conditions of D-Day. And so he was killed in action. But then in March 1945, she herself enlisted in the Women's Army Corps and began her own service journey. So their story is
Yeah, and we tell a little bit of her story in the gallery in our West Gallery at Soldiers Memorial in our St. Louis in Service exhibit, and we've rotated through a couple pieces of hers, but I think we still have her purse that's up, but we've had her uniform at the time, so we're very fortunate to have some of those other items besides the correspondence, which is really wonderful.
We actually don't have any other audience questions yet. Probably give it just a minute, see if anybody thinks of anything. But if not, we may wrap up there.
Well, it's you know, kind of fun theme to think about for Valentine's Day, and there are some people, you know, continue this tradition, but it's neat to think that this was happening not just on that holiday in particular, that it was really critical and important for a lot of these folks in that separation to have these type of communication or those little emblems that they would wear, and I think that it continues today in just different forms.
But it sounded like we don't have in the collection kind of a modern physical memento.
Yeah, we in particular here we focused on things in the Soldiers Memorial collection, and these items that are typically considered these sweetheart pieces. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, other than perhaps a letter or something, I don't know that we have anything. The oldest one I think that we have is that scarf from Korea.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and again, it tapered off. You know, again, it's a volume thing, and in the mass production of these things, these weren't made by the military, so it wasn't, you know, the government was producing these. They were commercial enterprises, and people saw opportunities. So as the volume of that and the need for that, and then, you know, people kind of changed a little bit. We also didn't have the you know, sort of the style changes, styles change, fashion changes, and then we didn't have the rationing really after World War II. So that was a key part where literally, like, the size of the skirts, the amount of fabric that could be used in women's clothing was limited, just like they were gathering aluminum and steel, all types of materials. And so the jewelry in particular was a way that they could kind of embellish or, you know, enhance their physical appearance with something that wasn't readily available. So many things were being limited, but also these drives to bring in these other raw materials to be repurposed for the war. So those little mementos, like the Smithsonian curator mentioned, you know, they were fashionable, was that it kind of gave you a little sense of style. And I wish we had better examples of the sweetheart jewelry in the collection. There's some folks that do collect. That's kind of been a popular niche topic for military items over the last decade or more. But there's some really beautiful pieces, you know, little fashion statements. You can imagine little brooches and bracelets and necklaces and that type of thing. But we just don't have too much of those pieces in the collection. But they were a fashion adornment. And then, of course, they symbolized and showed, demonstrated your patriotism. They often are red, white, and blue. There's lots of flag motifs. There's lots of branch of service motifs. There's a little interesting subset of them that features the service caps. So, like you see in the image on the screen here with the soldier, that's a service cap, and so they would have that. They even made a series of compacts, you know, that would hold your little makeup, that you could unscrew the top of the cap, and then there would be your little makeup. So they had a practical little forming function as well. Don't have one of those either. So if anybody's got a Army, Navy, Marine service cap compact, we'd love to have that.
That's really, I'd never heard of anything like that. That's really interesting. Well, thank you, Kate and Mike, and thanks to everyone who tuned in today. Like I mentioned in the introduction, when you close out the webinar, there should be a survey in your browser. We'd appreciate it if you take a couple minutes to fill that out. We put on several St. Louis History Live programs each week. The next one coming up is February 11th at 6:30 p.m. Stories of Home, Vietnamese St. Louis. Tune in to hear from a multi-generational panel of Vietnamese St. Louisans as they share their experiences of arriving in the region, establishing new lives, and becoming part of the community. Through their stories, you'll gain insights into the different waves of Vietnamese immigration since the 1970s and gain new perspectives on their journeys between two homes. And the next St. Louis History Live after that is coming up on the 16th at 11 a.m. It's Mighty Mississippi Road Trip. Longtime St. Louis radio personality, author, and travel journalist Bill Cleveland takes you on a journey along the Mississippi River, where he will highlight small towns, roadside attractions, and ideas for your next road trip from St. Louis, as soon as that is realistic. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you at the next one.